Vamos a continuar la sesión.
Let us resume the session. I'd like to draw the attention of the delegates to sub-item D of item 9 of the agenda, entitled Interactive Roundtables, Summaries by the Co-Presidents. These 3 interactive roundtables took place yesterday on the 21st of March and covered various topics. Now, I would like to congratulate the co-presidents of the roundtables for their leadership. And so based on these results and outcomes, I would now invite Madam Sahar Mohamed, Minister of Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt and co-president of the Interactive Roundtable 1, which worked on the topic Comparative Advantages and Opportunities of South-South cooperation, exchange of experience, best practices, and examples of successful cases, successful examples. Thank you. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to present the summary of the interactive panel discussion number 1, which considered the theme entitled Comparative Advantages and Opportunities of South-South Cooperation, Sharing Experiences, Best Practices, and Success Stories. We had a very interactive and fruitful discussion yesterday, during which the participants highlighted the comparative advantages of South-South cooperation and shared the following points and recommendations. Number 1, South-South cooperation instills a sense of ownership, contributes to a faster learning process, and reduces the cost of doing business. It also benefits consumers in markets of Global South and has net job creation impact. South-South cooperation initiatives range from the establishment of South-South think tanks, compilation of success stories, production of digital capacity catalogs, and peer learning. South-South cooperation partners are providers, facilitators, and beneficiaries of development cooperation. They lead and develop the scope of South-South initiatives according to sound and good governance cooperation principles. The transformative, innovative, and adaptive capacity of people in the rural and urban areas of the Global South is the major comparative advantage and an opportunity too. Key areas where South-South cooperation can have impact include trade, climate resilience pathways, and disaster risk reduction, infrastructure connectivity, digital economy, investment in human capital, health and education, youth and gender mainstreaming, agriculture, rural transformation, and opening markets for farm products, humanitarian crisis, support in post-conflict context, combating violence, extremism, and terrorism, science and technology. It also put a lot of emphasis on promoting e-commerce, digitalization of agriculture, rural economy to benefit smaller farmers, and overall support to SMEs with the emphasis on creating jobs for the youth. There is a need to create inter-regional and global frameworks to provide a platform to share best practices. South-South partners could continue to promote mutual respect on equal footing, mutual benefits, and the win-win outcomes, as well as advocate synergies and cooperation to benefit all players. Several UN agencies shared that they have South-South cooperation as a central pillar of their work, and participants encourage UN agencies to play a greater role in facilitating South-South cooperation as well as triangular cooperation. It was stressed that there is a need to promote more exchanges between both South-South and North-South partners. Participants highlighted the importance of developing a methodology to measure the impact of South-South cooperation and gather empirical evidence of impact, to mobilize additional resources to achieve the ambitious Agenda 2030. There is also a need to develop a system to monitor through joint efforts hosted at the UN level. We could learn from initiatives to improve effectiveness, including Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation and Effective Triangular Cooperation, and Total Official Support for Sustainable Development, a new methodology to capture development cooperation developed by both OECD and developing countries. In fact, some participants suggested that South-South cooperation needs to be designed and analyzed through a right to development lens. We need to share a new methodology to engage the private sector. More private sector participation is critical, including blending financing and social impact investments. We also need to learn from the international financial institutions and their experiences there. In order to leverage the transformation role of South-South cooperation, participants stressed the need to enhance access to funding and involvement of more civil society organizations, as well as to connect more with the social organizations and transformative processes, as well as strengthen knowledge sharing. They also emphasized the need to promote diversification of funding and to facilitate interaction and follow-up on implementation at all levels of governance. To harness the full potential of South-South cooperation, we need to expand women's leadership in the decision-making process and also in the policy debate and discussions. We also need to ensure accountability, combat corruption, and develop statistics and the composite database to capture flow of assistance from the South. Many participants shared their experiences, including initiatives relating to knowledge and technology transfer in agriculture, environmental performance review, combating violence, extremism, and humanitarian assistance in crisis situations. In conclusion, I wish to thank my co-chair, His Excellency Abdel Menem, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, and to express my sincere appreciation to all the panelists that contributed substantially to these outcomes, and all the participants that have actively participated in a very positive and constructive engagement throughout the panel. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the Minister of Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt for her summary of the work of Interactive Roundtable number 1. I now would like to invite to the rostrum His Excellency Bambang Bojonegoro, Minister of National Development Planning of Indonesia, as co-chair of the Interactive Panel Discussion 2 on challenges and strengthening of the institutional framework of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. Minister, you have the floor now.
¿Cambiaron entonces? Voy a corregir porque en el...
I'm going to correct myself because in the script I have Minister of Indonesia, but in fact it will be the Vice Minister of Ecuador who will take the floor. Please apologize, Minister. Thank you. Chairman, or President, thank you. The co-chair and Minister of National Development of Planning of Indonesia asked me to read the summary, so that is what I'm going to do. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, could the chair please switch off his mic? It's a pleasure for me to read the summary of Interactive Roundtable Panel 2, which examined the topic of challenges and the strengthening of institutional framework of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. We had a very productive and rich exchange of views where participants explored the measures that are necessary to strengthen institutional mechanisms and frameworks for South-South cooperation and to facilitate a comprehensive approach to government actions in this area. Now, the following main points were made in the course of the debate. 1. Developing countries have the prerogative of accepting measurements on a voluntary basis. The measurements of the processes and outcomes is essential to strengthen the notion that cooperation is extremely important for any form or model of development. Second, the participation of the private sector of the developing countries must include indicators of results or outcomes to measure job creation, fiscal tax payments, and other indicators. Third, various panelists shared information about very positive initiatives that have been derived from the experiences of their various cooperation agencies, and these were focused on South-South and triangular cooperation, and they were supposed to promote sustainable development. It was mentioned that development agencies are defined by their vision, their goals, and their values. In the past few decades, we've witnessed a growing increase in South-South cooperation in trade, transfer of technology, financing of development, and in dealing with climate change, migration, even in smaller states and the least developed countries. Where complex situations have occurred, and it's absolutely clear that it's urgent to establish a national, regional, and global institutional framework to ensure a rapid expansion of South-South cooperation to promote the development of these countries. Number 5. Given the multitude of actors and its scope, the philosophy of South-South cooperation is basically the philosophy of inclusion. But what is needed is multifaceted institutional arrangements. And in this context, South-South and triangular cooperation could be reviewed in various international forums, in particular at the high-level Forum for Sustainable Development. It's important to incorporate or strengthen South-South cooperation in national development plans and to complete programs pertaining to economic development and good governance. Also, it's important to acknowledge the important role of non-state actors and their possible contributions in order to implement the Sustainable Development Goals through various mechanisms, including, for example, extensive financing and combined financing, or joint financing. 7, the current institutional framework has not been adapted for the challenges that South-South cooperation has confronted. And in spite of the notable successes that have been achieved, the Buenos Aires Plan of Action has not yet been fully implemented. The various UN entities and agencies must incorporate South-South cooperation as an important focal point in order to coordinate their work with the country teams, with UN country teams. Also, it was highlighted that a South Forum could be created that would include ministers of finance, foreign ministers, or ministers of development. An eighth point that was also highlighted is a recommendation to strengthen the institutional map for South-South cooperation at the regional and international level, and the adoption of measures to ensure that related relevant data are not only compiled by donor countries, but also by developing countries themselves, or recipient countries. Lastly, it's important to highlight that participants underscored that the goals of sustainable development goals are essential to promote a model of development where South-South cooperation is a key element, but there are various challenges that must be tackled to achieve this, in particular with regard to creating a propitious or conducive environment for this kind of development and cooperation. I have to say that the panel in general, the roundtable, underscored the importance of South-South and triangular cooperation, underscoring that the main challenge for these is to tackle the global challenges facing this kind of cooperation. Of course, embracing the commitments necessary to implement the 2030 Agenda, incorporating South-South and triangular cooperation into development goals. This could be done with a better and better design methodology, training, and participation, among other elements. Also, this was a way to achieve a greater degree of consensus and to adapt this kind of cooperation to the various paradigms and approaches to development, incorporating new actors and using technological tools in an approach where solidarity and the human factor play the most important role. Lastly, I want to thank the co-chair, the Minister Bang Bang of Indonesia, for his excellent work, and in particular for the valuable contributions of all the participants in the interactive panel number 2. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Vice Minister of Foreign Relations of Ecuador for the summary of panel number 2. And I now invite to the rostrum Her Excellency Diane Keita, Minister of Cooperation and African Integration of the Republic of Guinea. She was the co-chair of the interactive panel discussion 3 on the theme Scaling Up the Means of Implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in support of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. Madam Minister, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies, gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present the summary of interactive panel discussion 3 on the theme Scaling Up the Means of Implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in support of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. We had very fruitful discussions during which participants brought to light 12 recommendations, which I will read as follows. First, the need to exploit the enormous potential of South-South and triangular cooperation in order to ensure that nobody is left behind. It is essential to mobilize additional resources in order to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Access to technology is essential for economic ownership and empowerment of developing countries, particularly through policies making it possible for them to join the fourth industrial revolution. South-South cooperation can play an important role in technology transfer between developing countries in this regard. Point 2. It was stressed that South-South cooperation is an important tool for developing countries to increase their collective autonomy. 3. Participants also stress the importance of the participation of all stakeholders in follow-up mechanisms, the results of the outcome statement of the conference, as well as networks making it possible for partners in the North and South to come to agreements whilst respecting methodology and cooperation. 4. Means should be found to create incentives for investment in the future by the international financial system, as well as encouraging private investment in sustainable development. 5. It is important to develop fiscal policy in the region by initiatives such as tax investment without borders, as well as adopt advanced technology. 6. Participants stress the need to guarantee consistent commitment by the private sector in order to make the most of its comparative advantages, especially through South-South and triangular cooperation, and to assess the impact of private sector participation in the implementation of the sustainable goals. Point 7. Participants emphasize the need of using the potential of other means of cooperation. In this regard, development partners, it was stressed, must respect their commitments. 8. Participants indicated that triangular cooperation can strengthen the capacities of the South in the economic and environmental sectors. The systems of cooperation should integrate South-South and triangular cooperation more in their work programs. 9. The United Nations system, particularly the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, should make trilateral arrangements on the basis of experience gained within the United Nations and by partner countries. 10. Besides the efforts to promote technical cooperation between developing countries, a lot remains to be done in order to find other means of implementation, such as commerce, trade, ethical practice in the private sector, as well as to respond to major challenges, such as the fight against illicit financing flows. 11. Participants stress the need for a new South-South cooperation strategy on the United Nations level in order to maintain solid South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation in international cooperation programs. 12. In conclusion, I would like to most warmly thank my co-chair, His Excellency, Ambassador Marc-André Blanchard, permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York, and I would also like to express my gratitude to the speakers and to all the participants for their commitment and their positive and constructive contributions. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I thank the Minister of Cooperation and African Integration of the Republic of Guinea for her statement. Delegations are reminded that the summaries of the 3 interactive panel discussions will be contained in the report of the conference. The conference has thus concluded its consideration of sub-item D of Agenda Item 9 and of Agenda Item 9 as a whole. Before proceeding further, I should like to remind delegations that Agenda Item 6, Organization of Work, and Agenda Item 5, Election of Officers other than the President, which have been considered at a previous meeting, remain open. There being no other matters to be discussed under the items, the conference has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda Items 5 and 6. The conference will now consider sub-item B of Agenda Item 7, entitled Report of the Credentials Committee. Delegations have before them the report of the Credentials Committee, issued as document A/Conf 235/5. I now give the floor to the chair of the Credentials Committee, Ambassador Anthony Liverpool of Antigua and Barbuda, to introduce the report of the Credentials Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Credentials Committee, I have the honor to introduce the report of the committee concerning the credentials of the representatives to the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, contained in document A/CONF.235/5. Having considered the credentials of the representatives at its meeting on the 21st of March 2019, the Credentials Committee adopted without a vote a resolution accepting the credentials. The committee also recommended to the conference the adoption of the draft resolution concerning credentials of representatives to the conference contained in paragraph 19 of the report of the committee. I would like to note that the following states have submitted formal credentials after the meeting of the Credentials Committee. They are El Salvador, Guatemala, Myanmar, Serbia, and Singapore. In addition, the following state has also submitted provincial credentials after the meeting of the committee: Lesotho. The draft resolution provide approving the report of the Credentials Committee, and the additional credentials submitted after the meeting of the committee are therefore before the conference for its consideration. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the members of the committee and to the Secretariat for facilitating our work. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the chair of the Credentials Committee. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt the draft resolution entitled Credentials of Representatives to the Second High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, recommended by the committee in paragraph 19 of its report, and accept the additional credentials submitted after the meeting of the Credentials Committee? I hear no objection. It is so decided. Does any delegation wish to make a statement following adoption of the resolution on the report of the Credentials Committee? It is my understanding that we have a statement from the European Union. Thank you, Mr. President.
Insists that we are here to discuss South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, and we should focus only on how it can contribute to achieving our global goals, addressing both opportunities and challenges. However, we reiterate that the presidential elections of last May in Venezuela were neither free, fair, nor credible, lacking democratic legitimacy. The EU and its member states reiterate their full support to the National Assembly, which is a democratic, legitimate body of Venezuela, and whose powers need to be restored and respected, including the prerogatives and safety of its members. We underline our conviction that the solution to the multidimensional crisis affecting Venezuela can only be a political, democratic, and peaceful one, and therefore strongly renew our call for the restoration of democracy through free, transparent, and credible presidential elections. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam. Creo que también
I believe there is also a statement from Peru. Thank you very much. President, allow me to take the floor on behalf of the delegations of Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, and Peru. These countries are members of the Lima Group. I also take the floor on behalf of the delegations of Australia, Georgia, Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Republic of Korea, and the Dominican Republic. We wish to indicate that the approval of the report of the Credentials Committee should not be interpreted as a tacit recognition by our countries of the regime of Nicolás Maduro or his designated representatives at this conference. It should be stressed that our countries do not recognize the illegitimate regime of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela, and that to date, over 50 countries in the world have recognized Juan Guaidó as pro tempore president of Venezuela. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. There is also a statement by the Czech Republic.
Sí. Señor Presidente,
Yes, Mr. President.
Excellencies, I have the honor to speak on behalf of my country and to deliver the following statement. The Czech Republic dissociates from consensus on this credentials resolution solely to the extent that this resolution approves the credentials submitted by the Maduro regime on behalf of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
gracias, señor.
I thank the head of delegation of the Czech Republic. I now give the floor to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Mr. President, we deeply deplore that the delegations who spoke before me are trying to deflect the attention from the very important subject under consideration at this conference on South-South cooperation, and now intend to question the credentials of our delegation. The legitimacy of the constitutionally democratically elected government of President Nicolás Maduro, bringing issues that belong in the bilateral sphere to this forum endanger the rights and privileges of all full members of the United Nations. whilst these are being attacked, if a group of countries try to use our institution to undermine institutions or any other state in a violation of the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations, specifically Article 27, which prohibits interference in matters which are essentially part of the internal affairs of countries. There is no authority or power whatsoever in international law or in the foundational charter of this organization, which enables a country or group of countries, including those grouped together within the United Nations, can designate national authorities or governors of other independent and sovereign countries, and appropriating these faculties is illegal. We wish to reiterate that by virtue of Article 5 of our national constitution, sovereignty resides in the people and cannot be transferred from them. It is only the Venezuelan people who have the power and the authority to elect those who govern them. Mr. President, in line with the outcome document of this conference, we reiterate the need to conduct our international relations with strict regard for the principles of sovereignty, equality, and non-interference in the internal affairs of states. And in this regard, we recall the decision of the International Court of Justice of 1986, finding that in international law, there is no right or authority to interfere in the internal affairs of other states, and that the recognition of the political opposition of a state is a clear violation of the principle of non-intervention. Lastly, we call for the defense of the standards of international law and respect for the sovereign will of our peoples. And we conclude alerting the international community that what we are seeing today is the first step of a campaign of aggression against our country, which is being attempted to be escalated as far as the General Assembly of the United Nations in order to disregard the rights of a country which is a full member, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. If this were to happen, the enemies of peace will have struck another major blow to everything the United Nations represents. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now give the floor to the delegation of the Russian Federation, which wishes to make a statement.
Mr. President, thank you. The Russian Federation would like to express its deep disappointment in connection with the statements by the representatives of the European Union and Peru on behalf of the Lima Group and others, supporting the so-called interim president of Venezuela, Guaido. We categorically do not share the position in the statement. In these statements, the main goal of which are once again to delegitimize the legitimate and legal government of the country using the authoritative international forum. These attempts are in breach of the UN Charter and the founding principles of international law. And they are an open attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of the members of this organization. It's very unfortunate that members of this conference have decided to take the path of confrontation and introduce division into this forum. These will not increase the legitimacy of Guaido, nor do they contribute to trying to resolve the situation in Venezuela. It's clear that those who have spoken against the legitimate government of Venezuela are not interested in resolving this situation. All this hinders dealing with a very large-scale issue standing before developing countries in the area of development, which this conference was convened for. We believe that we should demonstrate solidarity not in attacking an individual country, but in trying to tackle the acute challenges of the modern world, especially since we live in a multipolar for an interdependent world. We regret that in spite of the efforts of Argentina on an excellent organization of this very important event, just at the end of this event, it has been darkened by an unnecessary attempt at politicization. The only thing we can wish is that it will not have an impact on dealing with the very important tasks in the area of South-South cooperation. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Cuba. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Cuba deplores the attempt by some delegations to politicize the debate of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South cooperation. Cuba reiterates its full support to the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and to its constitutional president, Nicolás Maduro, and expresses its solidarity with the Venezuelan people subjected to constant attacks and aggressions from the outside. The self-proclaimed caretaker president of Venezuela was actually appointed by the government of the United States of America, which is very interested in oil and not interested at all in the well-being of the Venezuelan people. Thus, the only legal credentials which are legally valid to represent the government of Venezuela are those of its legitimate government, constituted under Nicolás Maduro Moro, as approved in the credentials included in ARS 6193, adopted by consensus of the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 17, 2018, and ratified by this conference. Lastly, Mr. President, Cuba calls for the Charter of the United Nations and international law to be respected, particularly with regard to the sovereignty of states and non-interference in their internal affairs. Thank you very much, sir.
Gracias.
Thank you, Minister. I now give the floor to the delegation of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. China supports the plenary meeting's adoption of the report resolution of the Credentials Committee. The General Assembly, at its 73rd session, had already taken a decision on the representation of its member states, which should maintain the authority and seriousness of the relevant GA resolution. China opposes the discussion of the representation of Venezuela at this high-level conference on South-South cooperation. China opposes any action this conference may take that would contravene with the relevant decision of the 73rd session of the GA. China supports the Venezuelan government in its effort to maintain national sovereignty, independence, and stability. China is for abiding by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter by all states, especially the principles of non-interference, mutual respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and other norms governing international relations and international law. China opposes the interference of domestic affairs of Venezuela by foreign forces. The affairs of Venezuela should be and can only be decided by the people of Venezuela themselves. I hope the international community will do things that would generally be conducive to the stability, economic development, and improvement of people's livelihood of Venezuela. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia. Mr. President, we regret that this conference, which was organized to discuss important topics of the development of countries, has has been undermined by a number of statements. The approval of the report of the Credentials Committee is a relevant document for this organization. The organization cannot allow that there be challenges to a legitimately elected government. The Conference on South-South Cooperation cannot be used for political aims, but rather it should be used for the purpose it was created. My delegation would like to make an appeal regarding the principles and norms of international law in line with the United Nations Charter, including the right to free determination, sovereignty, and non-interference in internal affairs. Thank you very much. Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua. Thank you, Mr. President. Nicaragua, and its bases foreign policy on three main pillars: respect for sovereignty of countries, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful resolution of disputes. Therefore, Nicaragua rejects this attempt to politicize a conference that up to now has been going smoothly and very successfully. And the intention of those who attack Venezuela, unfortunately, damages Argentina, which is the host nation of this conference, where we have all been invited, and we heard various statements wishing success for this conference. However, now that the report of the Credentials Committee has been approved, it's very unfortunate that this issue has been raised after it's been approved. We would like to reiterate that we recognize President Maduro as a legitimate president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And therefore, we recognize the delegation represented here by Juan Jose Valera that represents the government of Nicolas Maduro. We would like to support and endorse the conclusions and the suggestions of the Credentials Committee. And with that, we would like to also request that the United Nations Charter be respected. The United Nations Charter is also damaged by this unfortunate political ploy by those who have decided to attack Venezuela in the midst of a meeting dedicated to South-South cooperation. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Then I would make some few comments on this topic. We are extremely concerned and even shocked by statements just made which casted doubt on the authenticity and legality of formal credentials submitted by a UN member state, Venezuela, for its delegation attending this UN conference. The legal soundness of the process of submission is reflected in the paragraph 1 of the Memorandum of Secretary General, as referred to also in the paragraph 6 of the report of the Credentials Committee, which is now before us for adoption. The motivation behind such statements at this final stage of the conference can be considered as twofold. First, to abuse this important conference for an absolutely political agenda, which is absolutely an irrelevant non-issue. And second, to raise such an anomalous case to undermine the outstanding outcomes of this timely UN conference. We also consider this attempt as a disrespect to host country Argentina and to the United Nations, who have been working hard together to make this timely and important conference possible, which is meant to enhance further the solidarity among Global South and to upgrade relations with partners from the North. This is a manifestation of interference in internal affairs of a sovereign and independent UN member state, which at the same time constituting another rampant blow to multilateralism and the United Nations. My delegation, Mr. Chairman, in line with other delegations of the same concern, requests through Your Excellency the distinguished delegations who made statements to withdraw their objections and rejoin the House in accepting credentials and adopting the report of the Credential Committee, allowing a smooth and promising end for this historic BAPA+40 conference. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Japan.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The delegation of Japan would also like to clarify its position on the approval of the report of the Credentials Committee, as other delegations have done. Japan would like to express once again its clear support to Interim President Juan Guaido, and urges that free and fair presidential elections be held in Venezuela as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Gracias, señor embajador.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the delegation of South Africa.
Mr. President, South Africa supports the adoption of the report of the Credential Committee, and we condemn in the strongest terms the crude manner in which the credibility and legitimacy of this conference has sought to be undermined. We are reminded, Mr. President, that the General Assembly at its 73rd session had taken a decision on the representatives of Venezuela, which was accepted. We are also reminded that Venezuela held its presidential elections on 20 May 2018 on the basis of its national laws governing such elections. These elections took place in accordance with the agreement of electoral guarantees that was signed by all political parties shortly before the elections. The elections were further overseen by Venezuela's National Electoral Council. It was on this basis that South Africa's President, His Excellency, Mr. Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, congratulated President Maduro following his inauguration for a second term as President. A founding principle of South Africa's constitutional democracy is the respect for the rule of law. South Africa remains deeply concerned by what is a clear attempt to circumvent Venezuela's constitutional legal mechanisms which govern its elections and the choice of its delegations to conferences of this nature. Any grievances or disputes should be resolved in a peaceful manner through the proper mechanisms and processes provided for in the Constitution of Venezuela and its electoral laws without external influence. An essential principle of South-South cooperation has always been non-interference in independent states' businesses. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on Article 31 of the Rules of Procedure of this meeting, under the title Resolving Issues of Specialization, the Syrian Arab Republic would like to reaffirm the fact that this esteemed meeting that is being held to discuss the credentials of the Venezuelan delegation is not authorized to do so because the jurisdiction to discuss such documents must take place at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this meeting is to focus on development and the advancement of the countries of the South and their peoples and their prosperity, and not to discuss political issues that have their own jurisdiction and their own experts, i.e. in the United Nations. Moreover, bringing up this topic will question the legitimacy, can open the door to questioning the legitimacy of any country by any other state, and is a violation of Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, because it is based on strictly political motivations, and it is an unacceptable and an illegal interference in the internal affairs of states. Therefore, the government of my country regrets that this behavior has taken place by the European Union and by the representatives of Lima. We state that this esteemed meeting does not have the jurisdiction to do so, because it is also in contradiction of the draft Article 8 of the Buenos Aires outcome document, which stipulates national sovereignty and the non-interference in the internal affairs of member states. Thank you.
Gracias. Entiendo.
As I understand it, there are no further requests for the floor. The conference has thus concluded its consideration of sub-item B of Agenda Item 7 and of Agenda Item 7 as a whole. The conference will now consider Agenda Item 10, adoption of the outcome document of the conference. The conference has before it document A/conf235/L.1, containing a draft resolution entitled Buenos Aires Outcome Document of the Second High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. Before proceeding further, I would like to thank all states for their constructive participation in the negotiations on the draft outcome document, and especially the co-facilitators of the intergovernmental negotiations of the General Assembly. To wit, Her Excellency Audra Plepite, Permanent Representative of Lithuania to the United Nations, and His Excellency Adonia Ayebare, Permanent Representative of Uganda to the United Nations. I want to thank them for so ably leading and concluding the negotiations on the draft outcome document in New York. Now, before proceeding to adopt the decision, I would like to give the floor to the Secretary of the Conference to make a clarification.
Thank you, Mr. President. With regard to the text of the outcome document before the conference, in document A/conf.235/3, I would like to inform delegations that I have been made aware that editorial changes were made to the English text of the outcome document agreed in New York, which are regarded by delegations as substantive. On behalf of the Secretariat, I would like to confirm that the English text of the outcome document will be reissued to revert to the text as agreed in New York without these editorial changes. Other language versions will be adjusted and reissued accordingly. The corrected text will be included in the final report of the conference, as well as in the outcome document that will be presented to the General Assembly later for its adoption. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias a la
I'd like to thank the Secretary of the Conference. As I understand, the representative of the state of Palestine wishes to take the floor on behalf of the G77 plus China.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor to speak on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. When this issue of the editing of the English text arose this morning, we've conducted the consultation among our group, the Group of 77 and China, and I have been authorized on behalf of that group to accept the content of the explanation of the Undersecretary General for General Assembly Affairs, that the text that we have negotiated in New York, the English text, is what we will adopt in this meeting today. And when we go back to New York, we will make sure that the translation to the other 5 languages would be identical to the English text that we have negotiated and approved in New York through consultation. And based on that understanding, our group will accept and will endorse and approve the final document in the English text as was articulated by the Undersecretary General. And I thank you very much.
I want to thank the representative of the State of Palestine for his statement. So, we shall now proceed to consider draft resolution A/conf 235/L1. The conference must now adopt a decision on this document, whose title is the outcome document of the Second United Nations High-Level Conference on South-South Cooperation. Can I therefore consider that the conference wishes to adopt draft resolution A/conf 231/L.1? I see that there are no objections. It is so decided. As I understand, we have one explanation of vote to be made by the delegation of the United States.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the co-facilitators, Ambassador Adonia Ayabare and Ambassador Audra Plepite, for their leadership throughout this process. They ably guided the outcome document over the past few months, helping to build consensus on a range of difficult but important issues. South-South cooperation has made positive contributions to many countries' development. The United Nations recognized the value of this form of cooperation as a means to support countries on their journey to self-reliance, which our national statement addressed in depth. We take this opportunity to highlight areas of focus and follow-up in the outcome document, as well as to clarify important issues. The outcome document notes that South-South cooperation leads to more diverse opportunities for development and emphasizes its voluntary nature. We commend the Southern providers that have chosen to study and draw lessons from the experiences of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Assistance Committee members as providers of official development assistance. We also commend those recipient provider countries that participated in voluntary initiatives such as the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. The text states that South-South cooperation should not be seen as ODA. However, we emphasize the need to uphold internationally accepted standards for effective and sustainable development cooperation, regardless of the type of assistance provided. We welcome the efforts of Southern providers of assistance to report their cooperation as members of the international community, especially as total official support to sustainable development, which has been designed with their participation. The outcome document also emphasizes important best practices and standards for efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, accountability, sustainability, focus on results, oversight, and reporting. The United States would like to emphasize that irrespective of the area of programmatic focus mentioned in the text, United Nations agencies, funds, and programs, the UN Office of South-South Cooperation, as well as regional commissions and other entities, must follow the highest standards of transparency and accountability in all of their programs. Furthermore, the United States takes this opportunity to make important points of clarification regarding the document's reaffirmation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Both are non-binding documents that do not create rights or obligations under international law. The United States supports the spirit of the 2030 Agenda as a framework for development and will continue to be a global leader in sustainable development. With regard to the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, we note that much of the trade-related language in the Addis Outcome document has been overtaken by events since July 2015. Therefore, it is immaterial, and our reaffirmation in the outcome document has no standing for ongoing work and negotiations that involve trade. With respect to the new urban agenda, the United States believes that each member state has the sovereign right to determine how it conducts trade with other countries, and that this includes restricting trade in certain circumstances. The United States reiterates our views on the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction from the U.S. explanation of position delivered in 2015. Additionally, the United States notes its intention to withdraw from the Paris Agreement as soon as it is eligible to do so, consistent with the terms of the agreement, unless suitable terms for re-engagement are identified. Therefore, the language on climate change in the Paris Agreement in this outcome document is without prejudice to U.S. positions. The United States enjoys strong and growing trade relationships across the globe. We welcome efforts to bolster those relationships, increase economic cooperation, and drive prosperity through free, fair, and reciprocal trade. However, as President Trump stated to the General Assembly on September 25, 2018, the United States will act in its sovereign interest, including on trade matters. This means that we do not take our trade policy direction from the UN. It is our view that the UN must respect the independent mandates of other processes and institutions, including trade negotiations, and must not involve itself in decisions and actions underway in other forums, including at the World Trade Organization. The UN is not the appropriate venue for these discussions. This includes calls that undermine incentives for innovation, such as technology transfer, that is not voluntary and on mutually agreed terms. We request that this statement be made part of the official record of the conference. Thank you.
I want to thank the delegate of the United States. I believe that that was the last speaker in explanation of vote, and thus we have concluded consideration of agenda item 10. I now invite the conference to consider agenda item 11, entitled Adoption of the Report of the Conference. Under this item, the conference has before it a draft resolution entitled Expression of Thanks to the People and Government of Argentina, which is contained in document A/conf.235/L.2, which was submitted by the State of Palestine on behalf of the states that are members of the Group of 77 and China. I would like to give the floor now to the representative of the State of Palestine to introduce this draft resolution A/conf.235/L2. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, it gives the State of Palestine pleasure to introduce the draft resolution entitled, and I quote, Expression of Thanks to the People and Government of Argentina, end of quotations, contained in document A/conf.235/L.2. Mr. President, With this resolution, the Group of 77 and China would like to express its deep appreciation to Your Excellency for your outstanding contribution to the successful outcome of the conference, and would also like to express our profound gratitude to the government and people of Argentina for the hospitality and warm welcome extended to the participants of the conference, as well as for all the excellent facilities, staff, and services that were so graciously placed at the disposal of this conference. The Group of 77 and China is so proud that a member among our group, Argentina, is hosting this very successful conference, and I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I want to thank the representative of the delegation of the State of Palestine, and I thank him on behalf of the government and people of Argentina, who we have felt a great honor in organizing this conference, and we acknowledge the gratitude expressed in this resolution. So may I take it that the conference wishes to adopt the draft resolution A/conf.235/L.2. Thank you. I hear no objections. That is so decided. I now invite the conference to turn to document A/conf.235/L.3, which contains the draft report of the conference. And in this connection, I would like to give the floor to the Rapporteur General, His Excellency Sven Jurgensen, Permanent Representative of Estonia to the United Nations, to introduce the draft procedural report of the conference.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had the honor to introduce the draft report of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation as contained in document A/conf.235/L3. The draft report was distributed to all delegations yesterday morning, Thursday, 21st of March, through respective pigeonholes. The draft report contains Chapter 1, resolutions adopted by the conference, Chapter 2, organization of work and other organizational matters, which includes the opening and duration of the conference, election of the president and other officers of the conference, adoption of the rules of procedure, adoption of the agenda, organization of work, and the participation to the conference. Chapter 3, general debate on the role of South-South cooperation and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, challenges and opportunities. Chapter 4, report of the interactive panel discussions. Chapter 5, report of the Credentials Committee. Chapter 6, adoption of the final outcome of the conference. Chapter 7, adoption of the report of the conference. And Chapter 8, closure of the conference. In Chapter 1, the following resolutions just adopted by the conference will be included, namely, resolution entitled Buenos Aires Outcome Document of the Second High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation as contained in document A/conf.235/L1. With the adoption of this resolution, the full text of the outcome document of the conference contained in document A/conf.235/3 of the same title will be included in the final report. Resolution entitled Expression of Thanks to the People and Government of Argentina, as contained in document A/conf.235/L2, will be included in the final report. And resolution entitled Credentials of Representatives to the Second High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, as contained in document A/Conf235/5, will also be included in the final report. Chapter 2, Section B, on attendance at the conference will be completed after the conference to reflect the final participation. Chapter 3, General Debate on the Role of South-South Cooperation and the Implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Challenges and Opportunities, will be finalized to reflect the representatives of states and observers of intergovernmental organizations, United Nations system organizations, as well as non-governmental organizations and other stakeholders who made statements in the general debate of the conference during its plenary meetings. Here, I would like to draw delegations' attention to the number of plenary meetings held during the conference. As you are aware, 4 meetings were originally scheduled. However, in light of the large number of inscriptions in the general debate under item 8, a decision was made to hold an additional plenary meeting in the evening of Wednesday, 20th of March. Accordingly, references to the number of the respective plenary meetings will be revised, where relevant, in the final report of the conference to reflect the 5 meetings convened. Turning now to Chapter 4 of the draft report, entitled Report of the Interactive Panel Discussions, the summaries delivered this morning by the co-chairs of the 3 interactive panel discussions, as well as the list of speakers in each panel, will be included in the final report. Chapter 5 will be completed to reflect the information contained in the report of the Credentials Committee. The report will also be updated to reflect any statements made at this closing meeting. Finally, a list of documents before the conference will be incorporated as an annex to the final report. Mr. President, that concludes my introduction. I have the honor to submit to the conference the draft report for its adoption and to seek the authorization of the conference to finalize the report on its proceedings. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Gracias.
I thank the Rapporteur General of the conference. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt the draft report and authorize the Rapporteur General to finalize the report in conformity with the practice of the United Nations? I see no objection. It is so decided. The conference has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda Item 11. We have thus come to the close of our deliberations. I now give the floor to Mr. Achim Steiner, Secretary General of the Conference and Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme.
Señor Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores,
Distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of the Argentine Republic, Mr. Jorge Faria, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Ms. Maria Fernandez Espinosa, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
As Secretary General of the Conference, a privilege for me to offer some closing remarks for this highly successful second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. Throughout the past 3 days, we welcomed over 3,800 participants at the highest levels, with 160 member states, including 6 heads of state, 2 vice prime ministers, 61 ministers from around the world, as well as 23 intergovernmental organizations, 13 specialized agencies, numerous civil society, private sector, and academic institutions. This participation, plus the impressive over 14 million people who at one point or another followed the discussions virtually, is an indication of the interest and engagement in taking South-South cooperation to the next chapter. As a true commemoration of the historic Buenos Aires Plan of Action adopted here over 40 years ago, BAPA+40 and its outcome document will serve as a reference for future initiatives on South-South and triangular collaboration. The United Nations family is deeply appreciative of the leadership and support of the government of Argentina in hosting us. The strong collaboration between your government, the United Nations Department for General Assembly and Conference Management, the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and also our UN country team and UNDP country office here in Argentina helped us deliver together a very successful conference. If we reflect on the changes that have taken place in the global economy, in development, in human well-being, since the signing of the first BAPA 40 years ago, it is clear in all the statements that were made that really there are no limits to what we can achieve when we work together, when we combine the forces of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. We saw new partnerships being forged for current and future concerted efforts, and we have seen the spectrum of opportunities available to us, not least in the hall next door, where so many of you could see the practical engagements. Let us use the understanding that we have gained here and the partnerships we have forged to double down on the achievements of both the last 40 years, but in looking forward also to solve some of the greatest challenges of our time. The conference clearly demonstrated how countries can share experiences and adapt ideas to their own context. And I personally saw many of these examples, from Kenya's mobile phone-based money transfer system, supported in other countries, Mexico's experience in diversifying corn products, Cuba's support in the fight against Ebola, lessons from Chile to the Caribbean on product labeling, or knowledge strategies to reduce hunger by Colombia with Mesoamerican countries, just to cite a very small subjective selection of encounters I had. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we will all leave this conference with a lot of homework to do, but also many opportunities. The responsibility is now on us to take what we have heard, the linkages that we have made, and the connections to the next level. This includes the need to tackle climate change, address inequalities, as well as improve institutional arrangements both within and between countries to improve cooperation and trade. South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation will be vital tools in tackling these challenges. The simple fact is that we cannot achieve all 17 Sustainable Development Goals unless we leverage this cooperation, share practical solutions, and give each other the support, inspiration, and indeed the push in the right direction. Throughout our discussions, we also saw a growing recognition of the importance and complementarity of South-South and triangular cooperation. We have also keenly recognized that investment by multilateral, regional, and bilateral financial and development institutions in South-South and triangular cooperation will be vital. The United Nations family is actively pursuing innovative ways to expand the financing for SDG implementation and thereby also to leverage South-South cooperation. In addition to all of you, many actors from the United Nations family have been involved in these efforts. I would like to take this opportunity in my capacity as UNDP administrator to state that also in UNDP we welcome and are proud to continue to be entrusted with the hosting of the United Nations Office on South-South Cooperation, which we have done so with great pride and commitment since 1974. We look forward to working closely with the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation to implement the decisions you have taken here this week, and will forge a stronger collaborative partnership between the UN system-wide reach of the Office and our own work. In closing, Mr. President, I would like to warmly thank once more the government of Argentina for generously hosting us here in this beautiful city of Buenos Aires. The conference would not have been such a success without the leadership of your President and all of your government, and indeed all your staff. We will all leave BAPA+40 with increased vigor to build more prosperous, inclusive, resilient and secure societies. Thank you also to all member states present here for their determination to work in a cooperative spirit. I acknowledge and thank also the invaluable contributions from civil society, the private sector and many other stakeholders participating in the conference. The conference has brought the necessary momentum and provided us with a roadmap and outcome document for South-South and triangular cooperation. It will come alive not necessarily in the words of the document, but in the actions that it will inspire and trigger. And again, so much of what we saw during the days here in Buenos Aires speaks to the power of action and cooperation. Here I also wish to join others in thanking the co-facilitators of the outcome document, Her Excellency Ambassador Audra Plepte and His Excellency Mr. Donia Ayebare, respectively the permanent representatives of the Republic of Lithuania and Uganda to the United Nations, for their outstanding leadership in bringing us together on the road to Buenos Aires. The reinvigorated UN system has listened deeply and keenly to the wishes of delegates, and it stands ready to strongly support this momentum of change behind South-South cooperation, as you also saw evidenced in the decision by the Secretary General to join you here for this conference in Buenos Aires. May I also take this opportunity to thank all my colleagues in the UN family, in particular Catherine Pollard, Secretary of the Conference, and her team, Jorge Chedek, Director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and his team. Thank you for the work of your dedicated staff that made this conference such a success. It is true that the multilateral development system comes away from BAPA+40 in a better and inspired position to support South-South cooperation implement the 2030 agenda. I thank all of you for the passion, the knowledge, and the appetite for sustainable development and partnership that you have shown and shared with each other here this week. Finalmente, agradezco a los más.
Finally, I wish to thank the 100 volunteers of the University of Buenos Aires who worked long hours to ensure that our work was effective. Thank you very much.
Obviamente damos la
We thank the Secretary General of the conference for the report he's given us on the work and the conclusions we have reached. I now invite Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, President of the 73rd session of the General Assembly, to make a closing statement. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your Excellency, Jorge Fori, President of the Conference and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Argentina, Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Programme for Development and Secretary General of this conference, Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, I am grateful to the government and to the people of Argentina for hosting this historic conference. The organization, without any doubt, has been sterling. This meeting is a demonstration that through multilateralism we can achieve extraordinary results. Once again, I congratulate member states for their constructive role and for their dedication. I thank the ambassadors of Lithuania and Uganda for their extraordinary work as co-facilitators. And of course, I would like to thank the Secretariat team. Our efforts have been worthwhile. The outcome document reflects the evolution of South-South cooperation. It is a roadmap towards the future. It opens a spectrum of possibilities to broaden even further the horizons of cooperation and solidarity, not only between countries of the South, but also with developed countries and other central actors. Triangular cooperation brings them in as strategic partners. It also includes a mechanism for voluntary reports, which will make it possible for us to measure the impact of these forms of cooperation. Excellencies, I wish to quickly mention 3 topics. First, South-South and triangular cooperation accelerate Agenda 2030 because they strengthen its means of implementation by creating specific capacities in developing countries to eradicate poverty and hunger, to ensure more health and quality education, to put an end to discrimination and violence against women and girls, to safeguard the biodiversity of our planet, and to make the most of our capacity for adaptation, mitigation, and resilience when faced with climate change. Second, it is essential for these forms of cooperation to adapt to the challenges of rapid technological change. Countries of the South must enter the 4th industrial revolution appropriately. Technology is essential to transform production, trade, agriculture, medicine, infrastructure, services, And also, new technologies, if not properly used and not properly framed in form of governance, can deepen inequalities, alter social relations, and affect the future of work. This is why the intelligent entry of countries of the South in this new technological world is vital. Lastly, I wish to emphasize the strategic role of South-South cooperation to bring countries which share similar realities and challenges closer together. South-South cooperation acts as a catalyst of regional integration, both on the political, economic, and commercial basis. Indeed, this is what is happening in several regions, with Ibero-American cooperation, for example, which just in the past 10 years has recorded over 7,000 exchanges, or with the creation of the Technology Bank for less advanced countries in Turkey, and even on the inter-regional level, as shown by the International Solar Alliance, which brings together the 121 countries with the most sun in the world. I wish to acknowledge the role of support of the United Nations system in relaunching the South-South and Triangular Cooperation Agenda, particularly the United Nations Programme for Development and the Office of the United Nations for South-South Cooperation, as well as the important role of the UN regional commissions. Excellencies, in these 40 years of the Buenos Aires Programme of Action, we have come a long way. It has not been free of difficulty, but without any doubt, the South has emerged stronger. Buenos Aires today becomes once again a symbol of hope, not only for the South, but for all of those who stake our future on a world of more solidarity, more collective solutions, more closeness between the nations of the world, because, as the Latin American poet said so aptly, solidarity is the love of peoples. A vibrant, effective solidarity and closeness of our peoples will bring us a brighter, more sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor.
I thank the President of the 73rd session of the General Assembly for his statement. I now must give myself the floor in order to close this conference with a statement. The first word is thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thank you for coming as far as Argentina. Thank you for honoring my country 40 years after the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action. In many of the discussions I had over these past 3 days with different heads of delegation, several people mentioned the spirit of Buenos Aires. It is true that we had a conference which took place harmoniously, with a work environment and weather which supported us and which created a feeling in all of us that we are reviving the spirit of 40 years ago, but also that South-South cooperation must have a more dynamic drive. In today's world, we have reached a particularly delicate moment. Everybody here today, the world of the United Nations, acknowledges the international tensions to which we are subjected, and many of them come from the needs of our peoples who have unsatisfied demands. Sometimes, at these meetings which take place throughout the year, we find ways of moving forward. At other meetings, we do not achieve this. I believe that everybody here in this room is convinced that we need multilateralism. If we accept multilateralism. However, we must accept that sometimes we have to give up a little of our own positions in order to reach an understanding. Understanding only comes from agreement. But I think that in this conference did reflect that occasion, that of finding an agreement on a subject which gives concrete, specific results to our agenda and to each one of our peoples. This is why South-South and triangular cooperation that we put together is an indispensable component of the foreign policy and foreign relations of each one of our countries. That is the case today. It will continue to be so in the future. That is why, 40 years after Buenos Aires, we must work together for South-South cooperation to be more institutional, for it not to depend on these meetings or sporadic efforts. We are all countries that have to adopt assessment and follow-up methodologies for South-South cooperation for it to have a clearer impact. 40 years ago, here, the path to South-South cooperation was opened, and the outcome document we have just adopted has to be the roadmap for the time to come, helping us meet the commitments we have all adopted in the 2030 agenda, and also give South-South cooperation change, a qualitative change. In the preparatory work for BAPA+40 in New York, in the work of the General Secretariat and the Secretariat preparing for the conference, we have demonstrated that it is possible to work to reach consensus. Now we must all leave with the idea that the consensus we have put down on paper has to be worked on for the benefit of people, and it must be really specific and concrete. The world always watches this kind of meetings. It wonders about multilateral activity, the results we achieve as in our diplomatic activity. Everybody watches us, our peoples, our leaders, the think tanks. We should not stop using these tools to help people, at least one person in each one of our nations. Thank you very much.